just a little bit. I know we want to get to the Department of Education and the devastating consequences that its dismantling may have on the local uh, public education systems, but I want to talk about this issue of immigration and the expansive approach that Trump has taken. And I want to talk about how this issue was treated even under prior administrations, particularly the Obama administration. People seem to be have adopted this so-called zero tolerance approach, which is to say that if you're in the country illegally, you're all in the same basket, and so you all ought to be subject to the same uh, thoughts and processes relating to your right, if any, to remain in the country or be subject to deportation. But the fact of the matter is, our system is not zero tolerance. The Democratic Republic that we have here is based as much on the exception as it is the rule. It depends upon being administered by people who are honest, who have integrity, and who have a sense of compassion, and who are guided by hopefully a well-honed sense of right and wrong. None of those things seem to have very much to do with the kinds of decisions that Trump makes. So what about this issue? What about the people who say if you're in the country illegally, whether you've been here working and paying taxes and even serving in the military makes no difference. You're as subject to deportation as the person who's a MXX 13 or gang member or whatever. What do you think, Hassan, that there really should be some discretion there, and that we should that there should be a way for those people who admittedly came here illegally and are here illegally, but nevertheless have been proven to be contributors, positive and productive contributors? Should there be a pathway to citizenship for those people? Should there be a distinction in the activities of ICE in terms of identifying and taking actions to deport people? Should there be a distinction between those who proven to be productive aliens versus those who have records or have engaged in activities which are antisocial or illegal?
So two things. Before I jump into that, I want to go back to the point you made before you moved in and transition out. You asked a question about law. Lawyers are in business of the law, but it's still a business. And why should we expect anything different? Doctors are in a similar situation where they are a business, but they have a principle called do no harm. That's the guide, the principle for doctors. Well, lawyers have a principle as well, and their core principles are around loyalty and justice. Now we have a bunch of model rules that the ABA has put forward, but the model rules and generally in term identify that we must operate with loyalty to our client and in justice. I will argue that when firms are operating in a way that may hurt their current clients and the way that they know they're supporting an administration or supporting laws that may not be just and may not be legal, they're violating their core duty. They are doing harm, so to speak. So I do think that's an important distinction for lawyers. Again, lawyers make money, but the role of a lawyer isn't just to be a person to go make money. It's the idea that we are the administrators of the law. We are the law is the glue that holds the society together. It's the plumbing that makes sure things go smoothly. And when you start gucking it up, we all know what happens when your pipes get full and things back up. And I'm not gonna say what backs up, but things back up in the way that we didn't anticipate, and we need help supporting, and we can't fix ourselves. And I believe now, when you see lawyers turning away from their duty of loyalty and justice, we are going to see some things get gunked up fairly soon. Now, in terms of deportation, we've seen in this country, and quite candidly, there's been arguments about deportation our entire lives. This country has used immigration legally and illegally forever. Mitt Romney was arguing when he was, and I guess when he was in, I guess
Speaking.
Utah, and he was doing Olympics. He talked about how they needed and used immigrant work. These weren't legal immigrants; these were illegal immigration, illegal immigrants. So we've used immigrants. And I've said before, even now, Trump is going around and they're making a show of it. They're doing the apprentice style deportation. They're making a show of deporting immigrants. From what I've seen, the number they're deporting is still lower than Biden's numbers, and Biden wasn't big on deportation. So they have a huge plane. We do a huge military plane, have 20 people in the back of a plane getting deported to Venezuela. That's not deportation in the major way, but what it does is it shows fear. It shows fear in the community. It gives people the impression that the U.S. is coming down hard. They've publicly deported Haitians who were here legally, doing all kind of work, and they deported them because they were no longer given certain status. They are deporting, and even deporting people. They're deporting people to a jail in El Salvador, which I have grave concern for. And people being deported, and the jail. I haven't been able to figure it out. I've been doing research, and I can't find the details of how cruel and brutal the jail is. I've heard the jail be compared to a hellscape. I mean, it's a horrible, horrible place to be in. And they're deporting people from all over the world to El Salvador. People who don't live in El Salvador get deported to a jail in El Salvador. I don't know that that's the plan. But the question ideally is there discretion? There's always discretion. And that's the problem. There's discretion in that different administrations do it differently. Trump and ICE has discretion or have discretion. Think about this. If they really wanted to deport the most amount of people, they can easily walk into any hotel and say, hey, let me get a list of all the people who work here and run their socials through the system and see if they really who they say they are. They can go to restaurants writ large. I think they did this recently, but they can go to restaurants in any major city and line up. Let me see social. Let me see IDs. They can go to construction sites and say, hey, all the guys you have on site, let me see. Those are easy ways to get it. Every community. I went to a restaurant recently. I was in Jersey. I was at a restaurant. Everyone there spoke Spanish. I sat down. The menus were in Spanish. They had the small translation in English on the bottom of it. And by the way, the food was delicious. They had small translation on the bottom for English. I sat down. They spoke Spanish. I'm like, oh no español, which means we have so many communities that are all Hispanic and all Spanish speaking residents, and a good portion of those people are illegal immigrants, and we know that. We know that. They know the government knows that. The government hasn't actually come in and done mass arrests the way they could have done it. They're trying to make a point and intimidate people versus actually do the rule of law. So they're using discretion now. We don't like it. But they always, in the law, is always ground for discretion. The law can't be so immutable where it's hard and rigid because people will fall by the wayside. There are people who are here legally and who are contributing to society and maybe should stay. I know the immigration law. My thing is, and I'm very clear on this, change the law. We should have been changed the law. The immigration law, in that once a person overstays, they can adjust that status, doesn't even make sense. Hence, Elon Musk is still here, and he overstayed. From what I understand, he overstayed, and no one deported him. He's still here, and he went on to be a billionaire. So not only a billionaire, he wanted to be the richest man in the world. So they have you discretion depending on who it is. And typically, when you have immigrants from South America, whether El Salvador, Mexico, San Salvador, Venezuela, they have a different view on them than someone from South Africa or someone from Germany or from Britain.
How important is it, if at all, in terms of the exercise of discretion, that we ensure that the people in positions of authority to exercise that discretion come from backgrounds that are fully encompass the experiences of all the people? I mean, do we have to have people in authority all cut from the same cloth? Should they all be from the so-called major law firms? Certainly, that's not. Certainly, that there are bright people in firms, small firms such as yours or mine and others. That you don't have to have a 3,000 or 4,000 member law firm to have bright people. And certainly, all the lawyers in 3,000 and 4,000 person law firms aren't necessarily bright. Some of them are there by virtue of legacy and other causes and other reasons. So is it important that we have a quote diverse representation of people from various backgrounds? And if it is important, how is that affected by Trump's anti-DEI policies?
So now you ask a different question. Diversity. I'll be transparent for our viewers. I believe in diversity. The fact that I'm a black man doesn't indicate that the way people think it does, but I believe in diversity. I believe for a couple of different reasons. And diversity all kind of ways. I don't only mean diversity in race. And I mean, even in our community, I don't mind bringing people in our community from other places to give support. So I don't like the idea that in Baltimore we have a lot of all black schools. I I don't like the idea that in certain areas you have all white schools when there's other people and other races around. There's a value, there's inherent value in differences. Culturally, I think a certain kind of way. My background has trained me and honed me to think a certain kind of way. Someone from mainland China will think different than I think, by nature where they're from. Someone from Puerto Rico will think different than I think. Someone from Wyoming will think different than I think. It doesn't mean any of us are wrong. We get the most value as a community and society when we have all those parts together to figure out almost a meritocracy of ideas. When you have more people with different ideas and different backgrounds, that's helpful. You and I are both attorneys, and we are highly educated. We have a bunch of degrees. Um, that doesn't make us more intelligent or have a better understanding of things the way people think it does. A person a janitor could be just as intelligent as we are. Um, Probably more intelligent. I know people. I meet people who identify as geniuses who can't make it through school. So the word intelligent is a misnomer. We shouldn't be looking for the most intelligent, although that's helpful, and that may percolate at the top. There should be a clear diversity because we need it in order for things to go smoothly. We need the diversity, even gender. It shouldn't be all male or all female. I'm not even a fan of all female things, except sports. That's a whole different conversation. But in terms of how things work, we need a female's ideas. They're different than male ideas. Even a woman who was raised the same way that a man is raised, with the same culture, same background, has different experiences in the world, so her view is different. That view is important. That view is helpful for all kind of things. Although we have many people who want to have a very homogenous community, when they do homogenous community, they typically are typically one gender. It's homogenous in that men typically run everything. So it not only homogenous in terms of race and ethnicity, but also in gender. That doesn't work.
Yeah, but in all fairness, the notion of the creation of some sort of societal balance, if you will, to be achieved through diversity, didn't originate with that something about that being wrong didn't really start with Trump. I mean, we can go back to the Supreme Court's decision in the Harvard case, Justice Roberts' opinion, Chief Justice Roberts' opinion, which basically said that to the extent that you want to use race as a factor, then it's got to be on a more solid foundation than simply the desire to achieve some sort of diversity overall, that somehow it's got to be specifically tied to some discernible, observable, or improvable act of actual discrimination. And we know, at least from my experience, is that most of the institutions that, whether in education, higher education, or otherwise, have enacted programs to achieve diversity, which used to be called multiculturalism, which used to be called an offspring of affirmative action, which used to be called by all these different names. But the commonality is none of them really admitted that they discriminated against anybody. They're always on an active and current basis. It always, to at most, was addressing some effects, lingering effects, if you will, of historical discrimination. And to that end, never really identified when enough was enough, which is also one of the subtitles to our program, Money, Power, and Politics. Enough is enough. So, following up on Chief Justice Roberts' opinion, how do we know when there is enough, quote, diversity? What does diversity really mean? Our opinion is, this is not a legal principle, by the way, so let me be candid. Diversity is when there's enough Black folk in the room that we can talk to one another without feeling, any kind of self-insecurity, but not enough to make white folk afraid of our presence. That's the balance. That's when you have achieved diversity. Now, but I don't offer that as a legal principle. But the fact is, diversity is an undefined term, and the notion of when society has completely remedied even the lingering effects of past discrimination has not been identified in any cognizable way or accountable way. And that was ultimately, in my opinion, the basis that Chief Justice Roberts and a plurality, if not majority, of the Supreme Court at that time found the Harvard admissions policy to be unlawful. So how do you achieve diversity in a system that doesn't admit that discrimination that anyone is entitled to a remedy for the past discrimination? How do you achieve diversity in that context?
So I'll say this. Judge Roberts' position, and he's from Maryland. Judge Roberts is from Maryland, and certainly very bright guy, very accomplished jurist, as are all the members of the court. Their position is that it doesn't make sense to treat someone differently. And to your point, they ignore the historic. And we talk about affirmative action about Black people, and that part is a bit troubling in general. Every instance of the question of diversity or affirmative action or equality refers to people like me. The reality of diversity is across the board. We need diversity, and people who got the benefit from both diversity initiatives and affirmative action have been people well beyond the Black community, and that's the reality of it. The idea that I think people believe there's a meritocracy, and such as Roberts believe that if you're smart, you'll do well and you'll be accepted. That has not been the case. It's not the case for Black folks. I'm not even getting to the point of the historic nature of our predicament here in this country. The fact that we were slaves and we went through Jim Crow and separate equal. We have unequal schools, Brown v. Board, Plessy versus Ferguson. But I'll get into all that. But I'll get into that. But I'll get into the fact that basically Black folks have been killed for being Black. I mean, they continue to be killed. They have groups like the KKK and the Aryan Nation who part of their goal is to see us out of the country. The fact that they've been continued assaults on Black folks. The FBI keeps a record of race crimes and hate-based crimes. And recently we've seen an uptick in crimes against people who may be Jewish and as well as people who are Muslim. I think the biggest uptick has been against Muslims. I still believe the crimes against Black folks still outpace all that. And there's been a constant push towards the hurting and elimination of Black people. The idea that diversity is not an important thing and that things are equal ignores the fact, and it betrays the idea that the person saying it doesn't really know the world they live in. When a Black person applies for a job, it doesn't guarantee they'll get it. It's a good chance they won't get it because they're Black. We typically, from my experience, certainly Black professionals tend to be more qualified than their counterparts because you have to be more qualified to get a job than other people. And that goes across the board. So when people say we want to ignore the idea of the need for diversity, they ignore the idea that people get jobs and or are given positions not because of their skill level, but because of who they are. And typically, when you're a person who are white and non-minority, it's a leg up. Whiteness is something that people strive for a reason. There's benefits in being white. There's very few benefits in being Black. I love my race and my people, but when you look at the numbers and the metrics, people oftentimes white pass. I mean, pass for being white when they have fair skin for a reason. They pass for being white to have more resources to get into the larger world and the larger economy. They don't pass for being white because they want the white culture. We've never heard of that. They don't pass for being white because they want to be from Scandinavia. They pass for white to get a job, right? They pass for white to get their schools and get kids in better schools. They pass for white to have a situation where when they pulled over, they're not shot and killed at a traffic stop. They pass for white as a way to elevate their station in life. That is the crux of it. If being white is an elevation from being Black, there's an inherent problem. And a person who doesn't recognize that will never understand why there's even a need for any kind of race-based ideas. And keep in mind, we have these conversations about Harvard and the lawsuit. Oh, the lawsuit is that Blacks are getting in at Harvard and other people aren't getting in because it's race-based. We have other race-based programs, Legacy. They're not called race-based. Historically, the Ivy Leagues and the schools we talked about have legacy programs, which many schools are trying to walk away from now. Their legacy programs typically mean people whose parents went there. Well, historically, we weren't allowed in those schools. We can't be a legacy in those schools because we weren't allowed legally. They could say, Black man, you can't go here. So we have a history of white candidates going to those schools based on their parents going there and their legacy. And legacy admissions are much, 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 much more than people who are admitted based on affirmative action. It's not even a question. And the ones who are admitted based on affirmative action, and the argument they make is they're not qualified, and it's a lie. I'll tell everyone here that can hear me, and you can challenge me on this, it's a lie. The criteria for a person being admitted into any, whether job or school, is basic. You don't have to have a 4.0 to get into Harvard. They say we want it. You don't have to have it. It's many people who are not black, who have less grades than that and get in all the time. It's people with lower scores, SAT scores, to get in all the time. It's people who get jobs and aren't the most qualified person for the job and get in. Qualification is a word that people use. It's a misnomer. The president of the United States is qualified based on his age and his citizenry. That's it. You don't have to have a bunch of degrees and have a bunch of perspective and have a bunch of jobs and no, you don't have to have any of that. It sounds good. So we say someone's more qualified. It sounds good. A qualification is the basic thing you need to actually do something. It's not the most. And people who aren't black get the benefit of the doubt more often than not. The ones who are black don't.
But quite honestly, isn't there still the impression among nearly all people that institutions that are predominantly and traditionally white are better? Isn't there continuing to be a presumption that Harvard Law School is better than Howard Law School? Isn't there a continuing presumption that that Perkins Cole law firm with 5,000 lawyers, and I've just made that up or whatever, I don't know the real number, but that Perkins law firm is better than the Hassan Barnes firm with 3 lawyers? When I say better, isn't there a presumption that the people and the lawyers that work at Perkins or Wilmer Hale or Paul Weiss or any of them or Venable, isn't there a presumption that they're smarter than the lawyers who don't work in those firms? Aren't we still very much laboring as a nation and as a world under this precept of white supremacy? Isn't that really true? Isn't that still true?
I'll say this: people's opinion about law firms or either white institutions versus black. So Howard, as many people who can hear us and see this, is a vaunted institution of higher learning in the black community. Right? We have many people from Harvard who are geniuses who come out of Harvard and not out of Harvard, out of Howard and do well. They call it the Black Harvard. Actually, Howard is a great school. I would venture to say people will think Towson is a better school than Howard. People who aren't black would think Towson is a better school, or University of Maryland, College Park is a better school. Would I? No. The reality is there's some truth to that, but the truth is much more disturbing. It's not only Howard or Hampton or UMES or Morgan. Anything that's not one of the predominant schools is seen as less than. Even in other countries, like Americans don't value Indian colleges. They produce some of the best engineers that you can find on the planet. We don't favor those schools. We don't favor those people. They'll bring them in for discrete jobs as engineers, but they don't favor them. No one sending their kids to India to go to school to be a computer engineer, even though they have some great schools and produce great products. Same with China. We don't send our kids to China for their schools, even though worldwide people consider those schools, heads and shoulders better than American schools. The American populace wouldn't consider that a reasonable thing. Wealthy Americans don't send their kids to China to go to school unless they're politicians or has some reason to be in China. They don't. You would assume that you were the best education you want for your kid. You would. They don't assume that. The idea of education. Well, one second, Bob. The idea in this country, education isn't only. They don't only. Although I was raised, do your best and go to school and you'll be great. Other communities in this country have access to some of the best schools, and their idea of access isn't that it's more the kids are smarter or better. Their idea of access is the kids are different. So I want my kid around these kids because I know their parents have means, and we can also keep this in the family. So if Warren Buffett kids go there, my kids go in there as well.
But I think you make my point when you refer to Harvard or Princeton or Yale as, quote, one of the best schools. It begs the issue. That makes the fact that the presumption that Harvard or Princeton or Yale or Stanford or any of those are the, quote, best schools, isn't that, and that presumption guides everything else. In other words, isn't it true that if you graduate from Harvard or Yale or Stanford or Brown, all schools that have a long history of involvement in the slave trade and the economic benefits of it, that isn't it true that your chances of obtaining the kind of employment that you want at the level of compensation that you need, isn't it better? Not guaranteed, but isn't it better even today be based on the presumption that those schools are better than Howard, or better than Morgan, or better than UME?
Well, I think it's nuance. I think it's nuance. Schools get their recognition. Hence, we're in Baltimore. We're located in Baltimore. John Hopkins started off as a small school and is considered one of the best schools in the world at this point. Schools are gained in prominence based on their alumni. The reason Howard is considered so great, not because the curriculum is great. People don't know what the curriculum is if they don't go there, because the alumni have been so great. Same with Harvard. Harvard has produced more millionaires and billionaires you can shake a stick at. MIT is considered a great school because of who they produce. So hence my analogy to you was the schools in India and China produce people who are very, 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 very good at their job, and they still haven't been seen the same kind of way as Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Princeton, Brown, even lower level schools like Georgetown or NYU, Cornell. But the idea isn't only because they are white schools. It's true. People hear that you went to Brown and versus went to Howard. They see you as being a smart person or have you heads or shoulders above other people. It's their perception. It may be because that school is a white school. I don't think people think in those terms. I think the result is the same. I think they think in terms of, I know Harvard produced people who are geniuses. It's very hard to get into. They're very elite. People got to be smart to go there because people haven't been there. I don't necessarily think it's always because they're white. I think it happens to be because, again, historically, Black folks couldn't go to school. So as they were building a reputation up for being great schools, we were unable to read and write. So we were at a disadvantage, and we didn't produce a lot of immigration when those schools started. There wasn't a lot of people coming from Europe, coming from Asia, Southeast Asia or Asia to come to school here. Those weren't things. So primarily, those schools were primarily white men, and then after that, white people in general. So the history of the best and brightest have been there because of racism. I do think there's difference in terms of school, but yes, the outcome is people assume the white schools are superior to the Black schools. I saw a study recently that majority of, I think like 50% of all Black lawyers went to HBCUs, 75% of Black doctors went to HBCUs. A good number, most of the professionals we have in the society got degrees from Black universities and colleges. So even though there's a preference, we still are seeing a push back to the idea that white is the only school you can go to and is better.
And how do you reverse the effects of that continuing presumption without changing the people who make the ultimate decisions? How do you reverse that presumption without changing the people who make the decision on who to hire or who to provide an opportunity to? I mean, for example,
well, we know, Bob. We know.
Let me get this example. For example, we wouldn't know, more likely than not, nobody in the world would know who Elon Musk was, but for a $465 million loan made by Barack Obama when he was president. We wouldn't even know who he was, more likely than not. We wouldn't know that Tesla was on the verge of bankruptcy when that loan was made, or when that same president provided contracts to SpaceX, his firm, or to Starlink, the internet companies providing internet service now in Ukraine. So if we don't change the people who are making the decisions, how do we overcome the presumption that the decisions that they make are right because of who they are?
So you're asking a circular question, and then it circles back to our initial point. It was a stat, I don't have it in front of me now. I've read it years ago, that typically the hiring manager of any company determines how many people of color work there. You're more likely to get hired by someone who's non-white if you're a Black person who's applying for a job. That means the person hired is Indian, Asian, Hispanic, or Black. They're more likely to hire you for a job than their white counterpart. And not based on your skill level or experience or perceived ability. Those are the numbers. For some reason, when some people see the name of Jaquil Johnson, that's an indication I'm not hiring this person. And so the answer that you have is the value, and we talked about it earlier in the conversation, the value of diversity and what diversity means. It's not diversity for diversity's sake. It's diversity for all our sakes. People have different views on a person based on their own background. And that's why I said we need diversity. And that's how you guarantee that you have movement. You have a more diverse population of people, and you have more people who hire managers who aren't necessarily a white man or white woman who have different views. And not saying that everybody's white is biased and have an anti-Black bias, but the numbers are what they are.
And so even in our vocabulary, when you, for example, you along with a lot of other people use this phrase people of color. What the hell does that mean? I thought white was a color too. So who are we really talking about? We're talking about non-whites. Let's call it what it is. And when Trump attacks DEI, he really isn't intending to take the jobs away from white women who have been the largest beneficiaries of the program. He really is. If you really want to know who he's attacking, it's evident by his executive order relating to the Smithsonian to remove the Harriet Tubman exhibit from the national parks. And it's an attack. It's an attack that's fashioned not so much even by Trump personally, but by the people around him, like Stephen Miller, an avowed and devout racist, or by Steve Bannon, or by David Duke, or by the Oath Keepers or the Proud Boys. These are the people sitting around the Trump's table who has embraced, who in fact are the core of the so-called MAGA movement. There's no question in my mind, but this is an all-out assault against Black people. And the irony is, their objective is the same as the objective of the civil rights movement, which is that we become invisible. The civil rights movement said we would do it by assimilating into the white culture, so much so that they wouldn't recognize anymore that we were Black, and so therefore we would not be denied an opportunity based on skin color. Trump's people, Bannon's people simply say, get rid of them, period, make them disappear. We're going to erase them from the history book. Anything, we're going to call it woke. We're going to call it whatever we need to make sure that the other race, the people not of color, are continue to be not just in numerical majority, but in positions of authority to make the decisions. Isn't all of that really true?
So no, you're not getting me to co-sign that. So if all the people watching this, Attorney DeShield has a very unique perspective on the civil rights movement that I don't necessarily share. His view was that the idea that we wanted to be equal meant that we wanted to be the same, and there should be no distinction. I will say that I do agree with you, Attorney DeShield, that things were different in the Black community before the end of Separate but Equal. I believe that the community was stronger, and this is before my time. I'm looking on it as almost a quasi-historian, looking back on things and seeing how we moved and operated and seeing how we were able to build wealth in the way we aren't now. And that by the granting of our rights to live where we want to live and get rid of redlining laws and to go to different schools and take people out of the communities, we've seen a fall in communities. We've seen a fall in communities in Baltimore. We've seen a fall in communities in New York and DC. We've seen a fall in communities in LA, where Black communities, where the middle class Blacks have left the community and fled to the suburbs to to find a better life for their children and get better schools, leaving the communities behind of a concentration of people with lesser means, and how that has devolved. I don't think the civil rights movement projected that would be the outcome of their situation. Their goal was not to be lynched. Their goal was not to have their kids in inferior schools. Their goal was not to have their people treated differently. Their goals was to be the idea that to reclaim their humanity. The idea that you couldn't drink out of a water fountain because your Black lips may touch something is offensive to people was an offensive thing, and they wanted to get rid of that. And there were some people. The idea of the civil rights movement, I think, was the idea that to get rid of some Black folks had an impression that white folks were better because of all these things, and they wanted to get rid of that idea. The well-studied test in Brown v. Board, where they had the young girls look at dolls and they saw the ones they value most were the white dolls. The idea that and some Black folks, some people in general, Black or white, have a white bias, a bias for all things white. Some people have a bias for all things Black. The reason you have a bias for all things white is you're taught and you're raised that the things that come from this place or look like this are better. And it doesn't only affect Black folks. You see this in Asia, you see this in the Caribbean, you see it all over in a way that's been interesting. But the ultimate goal of the civil rights movement was to say, hey, it may have been phrased in a way that it led us to impasse, but hey, we're equal to you and we shouldn't be treated differently than you. I don't think anyone believed that, hey, I want to be seeing somebody other than Black. I believe the whole idea, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud, Soul Brother number one was still around, and those ideas were common in the Black community. The idea that Black pride and the idea of the protest with the Black fist, all those things are pro-Black. Those things aren't saying, hey, wash me away, I want to be invisible. Those things are saying, hey, see me for who I am. So that's a different idea. I do believe the argument for conservative is it should be no different than black and white. We all can get things in a meritocracy, but they ignore the fact that it's not a meritocracy, and the people who are saying that are not the best and brightest, and they're not the ones who will be the top, but for their association, their affiliation with the president, and or their friends. These aren't the best and brightest saying this. These aren't people we look at as intellectual juggernauts.
Well, getting back for just briefly, because we're near the end, and we never really got into the discussion about education. We'll leave that till next time, and maybe next time we'll even get to talk about it. But I want to invite all of you to keep tuning in to Money, Power, and Politics. We hope to get better as time goes on. We will be from time to time inviting guests from various segments of the community, the business community, and otherwise to talk about the issues. We'll talk about Trump's executive orders, which we'll never run out of the conversation about those things. We'll talk about the assault on public education by dismantling the Department of Education, which department has been critical to ensuring equal education opportunity across the country by making sure that there were funds available for poorer communities to provide programs that are available in the richer communities. But nevertheless, we've come to the end of the inaugural episode of Money, Power, and Politics. I hope that you have found our discussion interesting. As time goes on, we'll find a way to allow you even to participate in the discussion through chats and perhaps one day even calling in. I don't really know. I'm not the technology guru at all. I barely know how to turn a computer on. But in any event, for my colleague and friend Hassan Barnes, and for myself, and for Tia Murphy, our technology guru and our producer, we say farewell today. Please continue to turn in. Be kind to us. Give us time to hopefully get better, and we'll do our best as time goes on. Thank you. See you next Friday, 10 a.m.
Signing out. Thank you.